Hi, everybody. I am Thomas Howard. I'm one of the ICE technical marketing engineers, and I'm here to share with you today ICE automation for provisioning and patching. And we've been trying to do an ICE basic series for you all for the past year, which you can go and watch in our archives. This time, we're going to be doing something a little bit more advanced because it does require knowledge not only of REST APIs, but even Ansible to be able to do some of these automations. And the goal here really is to kind of give you guys some inspiration on things that you could potentially be doing with your ICE deployments as well. So don't feel like you have to be able to do everything. There's always a lot to learn. And this is one of those great skills that I think are really important going forward for all network engineers to be able to do a little bit of automation, have that tool in their pocket. So what we want to do today first is understand how often are you guys using REST APIs or automation in your job? Really, we just want to be able to understand what you're doing. How often are you doing it, or are we still really not using APIs or automation very much in your job right now? So if you go ahead and answer that poll question, we'd love to see what you guys think. And I'm not going to keep it up here very long. But let's go ahead and go on to the next slide while that's happening, while those votes are coming in. And just to remind you all that if you're not that familiar with using REST APIs or doing some of these ICE automation things like we'll be talking about today, we have done a lot of different webinars on this topic. And I invite you to go back, like I said, look back in our archives, either on YouTube or in the Cisco Learning Network where you registered for this webinar, and hopefully you can see some of the things to get started because this really builds on a lot of those concepts that we've already talked about. So if we can go ahead and have you close out that poll, Rigo, I would love to see what the answers are. All right. Wow. 56% of you have never used ICE REST APIs. That's why we're here. So I'm trying to give you guys some inspiration. Another 30% said rarely. 7% said monthly, 4% weekly, and only 3% daily. I'm not really surprised by that. It's great to see the numbers finally, to see where you guys are at. I think that there is a lot of learning to be done in this area, and that's why we're doing this, like I said, to give you guys some inspiration. So to that end, this is what we're going to be covering today. I want to go ahead and cover some of the concepts and how this is all going to work. And then we're actually going to do all these demos for you guys today. We're actually going to go through and show you how this works with Ansible. And because we can't fit all of this stuff in a single hour, I've actually done some time travel in video editing to make sure that it all fit in the time that we have today. And so for those of you that have done automations, I want to find out, how have you done it? What's your tool of choice that you've been using? What are you using for that? So that's the next poll question. If you guys want to go ahead and respond to that, a lot of different options in there. We know we've shown some of these for curl, Python, Postman, Ansible, Terraform. We've shown all these in these webinars, and so I'm really curious what you guys have used or what your tools of preference are. And even if it's not listed there, there's another checkbox you can use as well. So with that, one of the things that some people, when they hear automation, what they think of is that you're going to be able to push a button and magic is just going to happen, and this incredible creation is going to be built for you. And yes, to a certain extent that can happen, but in order to go from zero to full automation takes a bit of time and experience and training. So really the reality of what you're going to be starting with looks more like this. So what I want to do is I've put together a lot of Ansible playbooks and tasks for ICE, as well as some what are called roles to kind of help kickstart you on this process and kind of help you through that so that it won't be quite as daunting and you won't just be playing with your basic building blocks. So Rigo, if you can close out that poll, let's see what the answers are. All right. Okay, good. So it looks like 35% of you have used Python, 32% have used Postman, 14% Ansible, 9% curl, and then 7% other, and Terraform coming in at the end at 6%. So that is about what I would have expected. I would actually thought curl would have been a little bit higher, even than Ansible. It looks like some of you are really starting to use Ansible, so that's fantastic. I love it. Great numbers to understand. Thank you, guys. So to that end, what we're going to be doing is using Ansible today. And Ansible works by having a control node, which can be simply your own computer that you install Python onto, because Ansible runs on Python. And so once you've installed that, and I'll show you how to do that, how quick and easy it is, Ansible is going to install a bunch of software packages or libraries, which are called collections. And that gives you the functionality to build these playbooks. And a playbook is basically just a set of instructions that gets run, and you have the ability to do it against an inventory that you maintain. And that is basically a set of the computers or hosts that you're going to be managing and configuring. And you can do that for a lot of different devices. So Ansible was built by Red Hat. And so, of course, Red Hat is obviously known for their Linux servers. And so that's really like the main way that Ansible is probably used today, is managing, Linux hosts in data centers and for websites and things like that. It can also be used to manage Windows devices. It's just a different method of connection and managing those different packages. But we're going to be doing it for ISE nodes today, using REST APIs and even a little bit of SSH command line stuff. And we'll also be doing all of this in AWS. So we'll actually be launching an AWS virtual private cloud and putting all of our ISE nodes inside of it, and doing all this via REST APIs as well. So it's really pretty flexible in terms of how you want to do this automation and provisioning. And one other thing to note is you actually have the ability to do all this not only on those managed nodes, but you can also do certain operations on as your local host. So if you want to be able to do those REST APIs, you typically do it from your local host out to those resources, whereas some of the SSH things actually get run on those things remotely rather than on your local host. So just be aware of that little detail. And what we're going to be doing basically is, you think about the whole operational lifecycle of ISE. First thing you need to do is you need to provision all these nodes, and that's really the main topic of today, right? Is how are we going to do all this? And once you have all those nodes out there, then you need to kind of put them all together in some form of a deployment where they're all connected together and licensed and connected maybe with load balancers and other things, provision with certs, all that kind of stuff. We're not going to be doing all those things today, but we're going to be doing some of those for sure. We will also be doing configuration, because if you think about it, this is where you spend a lot of your time. You probably only upgrade your ISE deployment maybe once a year. For some of you, probably longer than that. But you're going to be spending your days just doing configuration updates and changes, right? Or some other operations with management of users and endpoints, reporting, making sure things are running okay, doing regular backups, all that kind of stuff, maybe adding patches too. And then finally, at the end of the day, not the end of the day, at some point, you destroy everything because you're done with this deployment and you need to do the next version of ISE and do a backup and restore that config onto the next one, at least in the cloud. That's how it's going to work. And so I'm really trying to make sure that you guys kind of have an understanding of all these different stages and steps, because ultimately, if you do plan to do a deployment in the cloud, these are all the things that you will need to be able to do. So we're going to touch on pretty much all these things today. And in order to do this, we need to use YAML. So YAML is the language that a lot of, or pretty much really all the Ansible playbooks are built on. It's also used for other things like Kubernetes container specifications and things like that. A lot of cloud stuff uses YAML. But what you need to know here is basically the way it's organized is it's actually pretty simple. First of all, it's a text document that can be either YML or YAML file extension on it, and it starts with 3 dashes. That's how we know the document is starting. Comments at the beginning of the line, just simply start with the hashtag, and then whenever you see a keyword with a colon, that indicates what's called a map, or some people call it a dictionary or a hash. And then what's happening here is this is actually specifying a sequence because you see the dashes for the the two different names, the two different network devices, and everything in a sequence is ordered. So it's not random. It's actually done in that specific sequence. And within those, we actually see some more maps or dictionaries. And in this case, you can see that we have a name that maps to the name tag that maps to the value of lab MR461. We have a description. We have in this case, a network device IP list, which maps to another map or dictionary, which contains an IP address and a mask. This one is a map that links to another sequence or list. And then this one's a map to another map. And finally, a map to an integer value. And then note also that you can have tags somewhere else in your line as long as it starts with a space and then a hashtag. So you have to basically have a space, a hashtag delimiter, and then it will be another comment at the end of the line. Now, if we want to reference any data inside of this, there's basically a structure in the way that you can do this, and it looks like this. So if you want to reference that IP address value, it's basically at the top level in the network devices object, and then it's the 0th item in that list, and then we're going to get the dictionary or map value of network device IP list, and then IP address is the next key value for that map or that hash. So that's how you would be able to index all of those values down inside of that structure. And whenever you want to do that inside of Ansible, you do it inside of these double curly braces. And so that's how we're able to reference things that we create in this structure. And this is exactly how I've done the initial inventory or think of our deployment plan for what we're going to do today. So the other thing I want to touch on real quick is how Ansible is organized. So you start off with an Ansible config file. This is pretty simple. It doesn't change a whole lot. And so whether you're doing basic or advanced, it's all pretty much the same. But in the case of host, if you're doing just something really simple in your lab, you can get away with a single host file. But once you start to do something a little bit more complicated, maybe you have stuff locally as well as in a cloud provider, you start to get multiple inventory files. You need to be able to slice and dice your inventory depending upon which host you're trying to do things with. And then there's also this concept of roles, which we're going to be touching on today. That's a little bit more of an advanced topic, but it is a nice way of summarizing a whole bunch of tasks into one stateful, I don't want to say object, but sort of it's really its own playbook in a lot of ways. It's a set of tasks that's going to run. And so hopefully when it's all done, you've installed something or completed a task. So that's what roles do. And then in the case of vars or variables, this is a place where people typically start to store a lot of their credentials or settings and things like that. And so these are the ones that I typically see used, and I'm actually going to be using a main.yaml file today, and we'll take a look at that. And then you have a bunch of playbooks. If you only have a really simple Ansible project, maybe you only have one playbook, but I'm actually going to be running like 7 of them today, and you'll see how we're able to use them to do different things. So just wanted you to be aware of how this works. And these are the 7 playbooks that I was talking about. So for provisioning, you'll notice I have the -- ask-pass there. I actually put that there because I had to remind myself that I need to provide an option on the command line to tell Ansible to ask me for my SSH key password, because we're actually going to be connecting to our ISE nodes via SSH and doing a password reset after we provision it, because there's an initial password that gets provisioned, and then we want to be able to change that. So I have to remind myself that, Thomas, if you don't put that keyword in there, you're going to totally mess up your playbook. So that's why I did that. And then we're going to gather some ISE Facts, which basically is information about the deployment. We're going to run through and actually do a patch. We're then going to deploy, put all those nodes into a deployment under a single primary pan node, configure the primary pan, which of course replicates to all the other ISE nodes in the deployment, do a backup, and then we're going to destroy the whole thing that we just created. And the reason for that is because When you're doing things in the cloud, time is money, and so all the resources you've created, you're getting charged for it. So if we're done with our demo, then we're going to go ahead and destroy those so we don't get billed for it anymore. So that's kind of the whole process I wanted to be able to go through and show you guys, just like we had in that life cycle. So with that, let's get started with the first thing, which is our setup. So before I do that, I probably should share with you guys. Here's my AWS where things are running. But what I want to do is go to my GitHub, and I just posted this repository for provisioning and patching. So everything you guys are seeing today is already out here. You'll be able to do this. I will tell you there's at least one bug I know about. So if you go ahead and download it, just might want to wait a few hours after today's thing, and I'll show you how hopefully it'll all be fixed by then. But this is all the stuff that we're doing. And the steps I'm going to be doing now are basically under this quick start, where we clone the repository, install Ansible and these Python packages, set up our environment by sourcing some variables. And then I've already got this set up for my situation, but may want to customize these for your environment. So the way this works is I like to go ahead and clone that repository into my local environment, and then change directories into that repository that we just cloned, and install what's called a virtual environment. What this is basically like a little mini container for installing all these packages, dependencies. And we do it a virtual environment because it isolates these dependencies for different projects that we may be working on. It's really a best practice. I highly recommend you do it. And it really doesn't take that long to do it, and it saves you a lot of hassle. So once we launch into it with the pipenv shell command, we are now able to run our Ansible playbook. Real quick, I wanted to show you the Ansible Galaxy collection list. This is what Ansible installs. So you can see there at the bottom, we have cisco.ise, all of the ISE packages in Ansible, version 2.5.8. But you can see, look at this list. There's just a whole bunch of things that Ansible installs. So you can automate a lot of different things, not just ISE. There's a bunch of other Cisco products and packages that you can do there as well. All right, so ready to move on. What we're going to do now is add our secrets. So I've actually got my secrets kept in my secrets folder. I've got my AWS tokens. I've got my ISE passwords, and I've got my repository passwords securely that I'm sourcing into my Linux environment here, my terminal, so that you can't quite see it, but it's there ready to use with my scripts. So that's how we got the environment set up. I just want to show you that really quick, and this is what you're going to want to do as well once you start playing with this. Before we get on to the actual deployment, I wanted to ask you all, how many nodes are in your production ISE deployment? I'm curious to see. I'm doing basically a large ISE deployment with 6 nodes. It has 2 dedicated PSNs, 2 dedicated MNTs, 2 dedicated PANs. I would love to know how many nodes you guys typically run in your production ISE deployments, because yours may actually be simpler with only 2 nodes, or it might be much more complex with, who knows, maybe you've got somebody out there with 50 of them. All right. So while you're answering that question, I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next thing with how this is all going to work. So when I run my deployment script, my playbook, like I said, we're going to create that Amazon VPC. And by the way, I see some of you are answering in the chat window. You're actually going to put your answers in the Slido window. That way it tallies everybody's up, if you can do that real quick. It's in the Slido polling window. So we're going to launch that VPC. We're going to create some DNS records. We're going to create some route tables, internet gateway, and we're going to, of course, instantiate our ISE instances out there as well. But they're going to be complete standalone nodes, right? When you first create an ISE node, it's completely standalone with basic services running on it. And what we want to do is, because we're launching, at least I'm going to be launching ISE 3.1 patch 1 in AWS. The current patch available to you is ISE 3.1 patch 4. So the first thing I want to do once I get these things instantiated is go ahead and patch those nodes to the latest patch, right? So I've got an FTP server set up actually in a separate VPC. I just put it inside of this one for making it quick and easy in the diagram. But you could put it in your own in that same VPC or have it somewhere else on your network as well. So we're going to patch those nodes to 3.1 patch 4, and then we're going to go ahead and assemble them into a deployment, and then we're going to elect the different services and roles that those things are going to use in our deployment so that we can then do some configuration and, of course, authentication and authorization of a user. So that's basically what we're going to do today. So Rigo, I see we got 99 people responded. What was you closed that poll out. Let's see what the results are. Yeah, 2 nodes. That's what I was thinking. I thought 2 would be the most common, but I see 100. That's fantastic. We got 100 nodes out there. But you can see there are some people that have 6 or more as well. So that's fantastic to see. Thank you all. That's exactly what I was hoping for. That's awesome. I love seeing how you guys have all deployed ISE. And so hopefully this is going to start to help some of you. Yeah, maybe not even in production, maybe just in your lab doing testing things out in your lab. This could be a great thing. That's awesome. Thank you. So let's go ahead and provision. So here we go. What we're going to do is simply run the Ansible playbook to provision, and I got that ask-pass option in there, and it prompts me for my SSH password. By default, it's the bit we're doing is going to be provisioning an SSH key, and an SSH key is protected by a passphrase, and so that's what we're doing is putting the passphrase in, and that's actually going to be provisioned automatically. But I need to put it in at the beginning of the play, so that's what I'm doing. So you can see Ansible's going through here. It's creating the VPC, subnet, route tables, security groups that we're going to be applying to our ISE instances. And now it's starting to create the ISE nodes. And by the way, this part actually takes a bit longer. I just sped this up so it happens faster for demo purposes. But this actually takes several minutes to instantiate all of these ISE nodes. And you can actually look at the clock above each section. You can see about how long those things took. So that took a couple of minutes to do that. And then what I like to do is for all the nodes that I just instantiated, I added a DNS entry in AWS, and then I like to see what the public IP address is and what the private IP address is of those instances. That way, while this is coming up, right? So what's happened is we've instantiated these things and we're booting them right now. So we're waiting for SSH to come up. We're going to wait for HTTPS, and then finally, the application server in ISE will be initialized, and that will give us the login page. That's critical because until that login page comes up, we can't run any REST APIs either. Okay, so if you can't log into the ISE GUI, you can't run REST APIs. So that's why we're waiting for all that. So this is basically what you're going to see. Once HTTPS is up, you're going to get this, initializing message. But once we detect the login page, then we know we can run REST APIs and do other automations. So again, I'm speeding this up. This is way faster than this usually takes about 30 minutes, which you'll see in the timestamps of our Ansible playbook here. Yeah, 33 minutes is how long that whole process just took. So now I'm doing the password resets. So I'm sure you guys have had to do password resets on ISE nodes. I actually have an Ansible automation that's going in via SSH and changing the password for all these nodes from the initial provisioning password, which was just like Cisco 12345, to something more secure. And I do get these little errors from time to time on the CLI, but it actually ends up being just fine. There's a little bit of timeout, so we might have to add a little bit of extra time in our connections for doing things like SSH, especially when you have multiple nodes in parallel. So now I'm running my ISE Facts. All right, so let's run through this and see what we did real quick. So what's happening is this is a summary of all the automations that we just ran. And what you can see here is I put a little banner out that said, no, ISE is provisioned. And you can see that whole process took 35 minutes that I just ran through in like, I think it was like 4 minutes is what I reduced it down to. But these are all of the things that you would have had to do manually that I just did in 35 minutes with a single command. And you can see the majority of that time was just waiting for those ISE nodes to boot, right? And so I'm sure you're no stranger to waiting for ISE nodes to boot either, but this just kind of helps you see how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and just log in really quick just to show you the result. This is the ISE primary pan node that I'm logging into, and the password I'm using here isn't the one that I initialized it with. It's actually the one that I reset it to. So again, if that's something that interests you, being able to have those automations for CLI commands is pretty awesome too. And I'll show you a resource on how to do that. Okay, so you can see I provisioned 6 nodes. This is the primary pan node, and you can see as it came up, it's just a standalone node, just like you would normally do when you bring one up. So it hasn't been deployed yet with all the other ISE nodes. Okay, so there's that. All right, so one of the things that I think is really cool about Ansible is that it summarizes all the tasks that you ran. And I should have done a little animation on this for you guys, but hopefully you can see all the things I've called out, the different things that it's doing. Obviously total time, I think it took us, I did a few more nodes this time. And in this particular slide, I was only doing 3 nodes, so it took 32 minutes. When I did 6 nodes just now, it took 35 minutes. So a little bit longer because you got more nodes to, reset passwords on and things like that. So that's why the total time was a little bit longer, but generally just over 30 minutes to do that. And so this kind of gives you a nice breakdown to know what are all the things that you did and how long did all of them take. Now the initial password provisioning, I wrote an article and put it in our Cisco community for you all to follow. That basically goes through and does several different CLI commands for ISE nodes. So it does some exec commands or show commands, gives an example of an interactive command, which is the password reset, which is exactly what you just saw working. And then if you want to monitor a process, like maybe I'm sure you guys are all, painfully familiar with the show application status ISE command, waiting for that thing to come back for 20 seconds. You can actually run an automation. And if you're waiting for ISE to boot, you can actually, I have a task that goes through and just kind of cycles through that every 20 seconds and waits for the ISE node to be initialized, if that's something that is an automation that would be useful for you. And then, of course, being able to configure a setting in ISE as well. So all those are out there in that document if that helps you. All right, so next question that we have for you all is how many unique users log into your production ISE deployment? So we're just looking for a number here. I'm curious how many ISE admins basically, or could not just ISE admins, but maybe it's your support desk and other people that log into your ISE node. I'm really curious what that number is, if you guys can share that with us. I'm going to hold right now because I have another Slido question coming up right after this one. So I'm going to try and get a few more numbers in there. Make sure you answer in the Slido panel, not the chat window. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my number in there. Okay, now I can see all the results. I put my number in. All right, so 6, 10, and 5 are the top numbers, but I can see 20, I can see 100. Good number of users. That's awesome. Someone put 5K. Wow. That's good. So good. I love seeing those numbers. Thank you all. That's fantastic. I love that. It's also probably good for you to see how other people use ISE and how many people are doing it. So the next one that I want to ask you all is how many time zones are your ISE users in? So are they spread up around the world? So maybe some of you are going to have 24. Maybe you only have 1. I'm curious what those are. This is basically time zones for me really as a proxy for how many potentially how many regions in a cloud deployment you might have. That's kind of what I'm thinking. But also there's the time zone setting in ISE too, right? So, all right, yeah, one time zone is the most common, especially when you have small. Again, earlier we had only two nodes was the most common number of nodes being deployed. So that's obviously a small deployment, and it makes sense that that would only be in one time zone, right? So yeah, yeah. So we definitely got some 24s out there. Fantastic. Thank you. All right. I love seeing that. All right. So um, one of the things you saw me generate was the ISE Facts. Ansible has something called Ansible Facts, which it runs on Linux hosts. But when I went to go do this with ISE, there's no ISE Facts. I had to build ISE Facts. So what I did is I ran through a bunch of tasks, basically polling the ISE nodes for what their deployment status is and uh, other things. And so that's what you can see over on the right-hand side. You can see all the attributes I'm trying to gather for each ISE node. So I'm trying to get the version information, what's its role, and has it been patched and things like that. And this allows me to get real-time information from all my ISE nodes to make sure they're all synced to the latest patch and version, or maybe there's a straggler out there I didn't realize. And then I actually have a nice little table that I can summarize all this into. And this is really helpful because now that it's been deployed, I want to patch it. And this is a nice way to verify the patch level and everything, and also what roles and services are running on these things. So with that, let's go ahead and do that real quick. So I'm going to run the next playbook, which is our ISE Facts. You already saw some of this earlier. So what I'm going to do is it's going out and it's running several queries on each standalone ISE node that I have out there. It's getting patch, hot patch information, version information, and node status information. All right, so you can see that it takes all 6 nodes that I have, and we'll start with the ppan on the top. All puts into one variable called ISE Facts, and it's basically one giant hash or dictionary with all these individual values. And so you can see how I can determine this one is currently a PSN, and you can see the version, see the patch level, what roles and services it's running. So again, all these are standalones right now. We haven't put them into a deployment. So even though they're called the ppan or the M&T node or whatever, they're actually all just standalones right now. We have to configure those. Yeah, there's the span, primary M&T node, right? So you get the idea. And then here's a nice little summary of everything. So again, this is all standalone, hasn't been configured deployment, so the name doesn't quite match the roles and the services yet, right? So first we're going to patch all this, bring it up from patch 1 to patch 4, and then we can go ahead and assign everybody their roles and services in the deployment. So with that, one other thing I wanted to mention is that I asked our developers to make it easier to call ISE tasks in Ansible by using environment variables. And I haven't had a chance to validate this yet, but hopefully you don't need to list the host name, username, and password in every single ISE task. You can just leave it blank. And as long as you use the environment variables, it should work. So that's one that you may look out for, and hopefully that's something you'll be able to start playing with and not have to have so many variables listed in all of your ISE tasks. So I just want to call that out to you guys. But now we have another poll question. Hopefully you guys are getting too tired of these poll questions. But how many hours does it take you to apply a patch to your ISE deployment? I'm going to show you how to do it really fast with some automation. So I'm curious, how long typically does it take you guys to deploy a patch in your environment? In hours. All right. Couple hours. Some people are like 6 to 15. Those must be those really big deployments, right? Some 24 hours. Yeah. Okay. So this is where I think automation is really going to help your life. So let's see how this works. ISE patching. So what we're going to do is run the playbook to patch the nodes. And again, this is sped up, but you'll get the idea because some of the stuff is just sitting waiting for nodes to reboot, right? You guys are used to that. So again, we're running the facts because we want to get the real-time information out of our ISE nodes to figure out what version and what patch are they running, right? That's the first step. Because if we're going to patch, we don't want to waste our time on a node that's already been patched. And Ansible has this concept of idempotency, right? So you can see all of our nodes are 3.1 patch 1. And so we're going to go through, we're going to find out, okay, what patch file did Thomas say he wanted to patch these nodes to? Okay, we want to go to patch 4. And now, because there's some basic validation that goes on to make sure that it's the same ISE version and that the patch number is greater than the one that's currently deployed on the box. Otherwise, why would we patch it, right? Don't want to waste time. So now it's going to go through and it's going to patch all the nodes. And like I said, and what I found is basically there's a timeout here when we're invoking the patch command. It goes over like 60 seconds. So I got to play with a timer on that. But the good news is that it actually does successfully kick off the patch command. So it actually does go connect to the FTP server, download it, restart, all that good stuff. And so one of the things that I built in here is this polling for the ports to detect when the node has rebooted. So what we're doing is actually, I'm not pulling the task API because in order to pull the task API, the node has to be up. And if the node is rebooting, you can't pull the task API. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling the ports. I'm checking to see is our ICE UI up on port 443 or port 80 or even SSH. And so once I detect that 443 is stopped, 80 is stopped, and 22 is stopped, then I can start waiting for it to come back up again. And so that's what's happening. Now I'm waiting for all three of those ports to come back in the reverse order. So now you can see 22 is up. We got our SSH. Now we're waiting for HTTP. Okay, so we got 80 and 443. That means we have the website, but we don't quite have the login screen yet. So now we're doing the wait for login. So we're pulling for that. Okay, and at some point, it all comes up. And I'm going to do another fact gathering exercise to make sure my nodes actually got upgraded. And let's see what the survey says. These nodes just got upgraded. They're probably still kind of stabilizing, so it takes a little bit longer to pull. All right, there it is. Aha! I saw some 4s in there. So if we scroll back up, there it is. So you can see all of our nodes, 3.1, patch 4. Okay, that's awesome. So again, all still standalone. So we patched in parallel. Now this is something you probably wouldn't want to do. So notice that we did get some failures, right? That's why they're in red because of that HTTPS connection error after 60 seconds. So what I would probably change, and we did it all in 31 minutes. How's that? Not bad, hey? That's pretty good. So it was only done in 31 minutes because we did it all in parallel. That's not something you'd probably want to do in production because then you would have all your nodes out at the same time, and that could be some downtime. That might be bad in your environment. So I show you this just to show you how fast it could be potentially. But keep in mind that if you do want to maintain high availability in production, you will want to do that linearly, or potentially some of you with those larger ISE deployments could determine an order where you were actually able to do some of those in parallel across different regions. Maybe if some of you, I know I saw had 3 regions, you could do different nodes in each of the regions in parallel potentially and speed up that process. So it would be up to you to kind of create a playbook with a strategy that would go through and automate those in a specific order. And so you could work that out with a playbook somehow. So hopefully that's something of interest to all of you, since everybody's got to patch their ISE nodes at some point, right? I wanted to show you that. Now that everything's patched to our latest release on 3.1, we want to go ahead and deploy it. So the way this works is we just run the playbook. So here we go. First thing is we have to elect our primary pan. So we have to go from standalone to primary pan. And this is going to take a little bit of time. And once that's done, we can start adding the individual standalone nodes as their appropriate role. So we're just adding them to the deployment, and it should also set their roles and services. So I got an error here. There's something wrong in my playbook, and I haven't quite got it all worked out. But what I'm able to do is I basically troubleshot this. I wanted to see, okay, it failed. What exactly failed? So I ran the facts again to see who's working, who's not. Okay, so you can see we're missing the primary PMNT. We're missing the secondary MNT. Okay, so somehow the secondary MNT got lost in that somehow. So I need to do some more spacing. Again, my timing, I need to take a little bit more time so it doesn't get lost. But if we go and take a look in the ISE GUI, you can see there's all the nodes. And ultimately what happened is it's complaining because my ISE primary pan is still considered a monitoring node. And that's where I screwed up, right? I needed to take it remove that role first before I added dedicated MNT nodes. So that was my mess up on that one. So the cool thing about Ansible is that it's idempotent. So if I just run the whole thing all over again, so I fixed my playbook, I ran it again, and now it did join the secondary MNT node after I removed those roles and services from the primary pan node. And now I'm running this script. This is how it normally would run, is it would add all the nodes and then it would wait for node synchronization. So I can pull the ISE node deployment status and see if it's connected or not. And now I can see they're all connected and they all have the right roles and services. Okay. So the lesson here is timing can get in your way, and you've got to watch out for, when you have a large deployment, making sure that you remove those dedicated MNT roles from your primary pan. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So what I did is, you see that it did actually join. It was synchronizing that secondary MNT node, and now everybody has synchronized in my deployment, and all of their roles and services look correct. Okay. So that was a little lesson learned. It didn't just magically take away the PSN service and the primary monitoring role from the PPAN when it was moved from standalone to primary pan. I actually had to go in and manually remove those with these APIs. So that's the thing I messed up on this one. So lesson learned. Hopefully you guys can learn from my mistake and not do that. But it's always good to practice these things, right? So there we go. So the next step, now that we have our deployment, everybody's happy under the ISE primary node, we can do a little configuration. So when you do the configuration, keep in mind all the nodes are in deployment. They're not standalone anymore. So we only need to configure the primary pan with our REST APIs. So the way my playbook is written is that it's only going to talk to the primary pan. And I'm not going to do a crazy config. I'm just trying to show you guys that very quickly we can automate some of this configuration. I'm actually importing this configuration from YAML files. These YAML files are the ones out there in the repository, so you guys can see everything that I'm configuring out there in that repository, or customize it for your own needs. So we got some endpoint groups, some network devices, going to add some endpoints in there as well. All right, there we are. So took about 60 seconds, just under a minute to do all that stuff, right? So the idea is now we can quickly do a test. So I've got my little EAT tester up here. I can quickly test an authentication with my test NAD that I just provisioned. So if I go look at my live logs, you can see, I think things are still kind of stabilizing. It's taking a while to fetch the records. There it is. All right. Yeah, you can see I just did the default policy. I didn't go through and configure a lot of crazy policies just yet. Just want to show you guys that, stuff is working. So there you go. And it did it with the, should have gone against the ISE PSN1. So let's double check that. Again, a little slow coming up after that initial deployment. Okay, so yeah, there it is. My policy. So it hit the PSN1. That's the one that I provisioned my test NAD to go talk to. So that's what I was provisioning. So all good. So there you go. So we ran through that complete deployment, did initial configuration, tested it, and I actually want to be able to create another automation where I do like a radius client. There's a Linux-based radius client that we can run and hopefully do all this. That's my goal in the future, is to add another little task for that. All right. Some bugs I want you guys to be aware of. One of the ones I hit was in ISE 3.1 patch 4, the one that we're running right now, and in ISE 3.2, the network device group. If you go to provision it, it actually has there was a change the developers made, and it was a breaking change, and they shouldn't have done it. And so just be aware, if you go to upgrade to ISE 3.2 or 3.1 patch 4 and you want to run some automations for network device groups, it will probably fail because the other name attribute was renamed to NDG type. Like I said, I've filed the bug. I'm working with them to get that changed, hopefully in the next patch for each of those releases. So hopefully that won't be there any longer. There's another one that one of our other folks at Cisco found for allowed protocols as well. So just be aware of these things if you're going to be using these APIs. It's always good to test it out first, right? All right, so now that we have our deployment configured, let's do a backup. So the way we do this is we run the backup script. And earlier we provisioned the repository. So ftp.trustzero.net, that's my FTP server. That's when we're going to back up to. I already provisioned that as part of the backup, as part of the patch process. So these nodes already have that repository out there. So what you're seeing is I told the PPN, let's do a backup. It kicks it off, and now I'm monitoring the backup progress. I'm waiting to see if it's completed or not. And again, this is sped up because it usually takes, I don't know, at least 6 minutes, sometimes like 10 minutes. And if we go take a look at our backup page, even though we invoked this via REST API with Ansible, you can see it still shows up in the GUI, right? Pretty cool. So there it is. There's the details invoked by OpenAPI. And what's weird is it says execute on ISE PMNT. So I don't know why it executed on the primary MNT instead of the pan. I'm pretty sure my script said to execute it from the primary pan. But ultimately, this one's going to fail. I'm not sure why it failed exactly. It says backup creation aborted, backup script failed, check the ADE log. And if I look here in the GUI, you can see the same exact message. So I went ahead and did a quick SSH into the ISE node to try and figure out from the ADE log, why did this fail? And If I scroll up past all this stuff here, so this appears to be where it fails. And all it says is cluster block exception because some service was unavailable. Um, and that doesn't tell me anything useful. So I'm not sure why this failed. I've done other backups like this in the past, and it's worked just fine for me. So this is the first time it failed, but I wanted to be honest with you guys and show you my work with the 6-node deployment. So this is what happened for me. I don't, like I said, this worked the same way with a smaller deployment. It worked just fine. So again, test this stuff out, see if it works for you. I'm suspecting there's something I messed up with the um, when I was calling the Ansible task. I got the node wrong somehow. I don't think so, but I had to go troubleshoot that somewhere. I just didn't have time to do that. Um, Last thing, right? We've done all this work. We've got 6 nodes running. I'm using the smallest demo-sized ICE nodes, not recommended for production. And maybe that's why this is not working because I'm trying to run a demo-sized instance type in AWS with 6 nodes, and maybe that's why it's not happy and backups are failing on me or something. I don't know. But if we're done with our demo, we're done playing in the lab for the day, whatever, right? We can come in and destroy it all so we don't get charged overnight. So here we go. So what I do is I go ahead and prompt for a project name. I always do a project name because I can have multiple projects going on with multiple resources out in different VPCs. So what I do is I run this, I do a quick check. Okay, what am I going to go destroy now? Okay, six instances of VPC, some subnets. Yeah, let's go ahead and do it. And then it's going to go through. And again, this is sped up. Usually this takes a minute or so per EC2 instance. I'm going to go delete all those VPC resources now. There we go. That wasn't too bad. It only took like 3 minutes. So 3 minutes of automation saved us who knows how much money depending upon the instance size you allocated in AWS. And these are all of our running instances. If we do a little refresh, you can see they've all been terminated. Yes, and Amazon's not going to charge us anymore for those. Fantastic. All right. So what I wanted to do is hopefully give you guys a teaser as to what are all the great things. Not even a teaser. I mean, this is real. This is all code you can go play with from my GitHub, right? Give you guys some inspiration, really, for what you can do, because ultimately, I want to get to the point where I can automate a backup or an upgrade. Sorry. I showed you a backup. I want to do an upgrade. So I'm curious, how many hours did your last ISE upgrade take? Go ahead and enter a response in that Slido poll for us. And I'm curious to see what your experience has been with ISE. So go ahead and tell me, how many hours did your ISE upgrade take? A weekend. All right, yeah. So obviously small deployments only take a couple of hours, but some folks out there with those larger deployments are taking a day or more, right? It can be a lot depending upon how many nodes you have and if you have problems, things like that. I like seeing these numbers, and I'm also asking because I want to take this back to engineering because I'm personally trying to make sure that we improve the speed. A lot of it, as you just saw in my demos, is really just the nodes rebooting and stuff. There's the actual upgrade process, but then there's just a lot of waiting around for reboots and things. So I'm interested to see how we can improve that. The next one I want to ask you guys is, what do you think is a reasonable time? So some of you took a weekend to do some of your stuff. I'd like to hear what you think should be reasonable. I want to take this back to engineering. So please tell me how long would be reasonable for you to do an ISE upgrade. 1 hour per node. I like that answer. Maximum 2 hours, 2 hour max. Yeah. Okay. Less than 8 for sure. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is I'm asking this. Like I said, I want to take this back to engineering. I want to show them this and say, okay, guys, we need to improve the backup process, and this is what people are expecting a reasonable upgrade time is. Okay. So thank you for that. Great information. So with that, I wanted to go ahead and remind you we have all of our archives are out on the ISE webinar site, on the YouTube channel. Hopefully you guys all know about the community, things like that. You should have my GitHub Let me post that up there again for you guys. Um, that's my GitHub account with all this stuff. Again, I got to make a few changes. I got to try and fix that problem with the ISE primary node not getting configured right. But otherwise, it's all out there. I encourage you to take a look at it and hopefully make some good stuff and make ISE deployments automated in your environment.